All right. So this is a brand new season of Up at Night with John. And I don't even know if I'm going to keep the name Up at Night with John anymore. I really don't. But I know it's going to be a second season. Really, I wanted guests like you. I wanted guests like a wide variety of guests on here. And today this is awesome. This is the Virgin ship, I guess you can say, or voyage of the second season. And I have Taylor Ellwood with me, who is a fiction and nonfiction author. I really want to start talking about that pretty soon because that's you actually are selling books. You're not just like saying like, "Hey, I'm a writer," and then like nothing comes out. You actually do it, and this is rare though, isn't it crazy how that's rare to say you are something and do the thing that you say you are doing?
I mean, I guess so. I don't know. I've always been kind of that way. Like if I'm saying I'm doing something, then I'm going to do it. And so, it just seems a little strange to me that it's somebody. But then again, I mean, I do see a lot of people who will say something and not necessarily go through with it. So, it's easier to say things than it is to actually act on it, and it's the actions that define the reality.
Right. It's fascinating because I mean I'm the same kind of person too. If I want to do something, I'm going to do it, and that's it. And I want to do it to a level to where I'm not regretting all the time that I put into it. But yeah, it's really crazy to hear any kind of creative endeavor that's being said in 2020, or at least in the past 10 years, I guess you can say. Anytime you hear someone who says their job is a creative endeavor, it's really a 50-50 shot that it's really the truth.
Well, I mean, up until a few weeks ago, I was still working a full-time job as a call support, customer support rep. I mean, and doing the writing, in the meantime. I mean, I've been self-employed before, but, for the last couple of years, I had worked at a customer support center, and now I'm back to doing full-time self-employment because I got my writing to the point where it basically replaced my salary and then some.
Right. Nice. And that's what I'm talking about. See, like that's what I'm saying. There's a lot of people who wouldn't take that, even that step. The second that they would have to do that to supplement something, they would be like, okay, well, it's over. The dream is dead. Blah blah blah. You know what I mean? And that's what I mean. There's just still that quality to it. And that's amazing. Um,
You have to really want something is what I find. And I mean, if you and there's a difference between saying you want it and actually wanting it. If you want it, you'll figure out a way to make it happen.
right. Which brings us to, I guess, generally to our main subject of today, which is the nonfiction side of your writing, which is primarily to do with, well, I want to say, I hate this word, such a loaded term, the occult. It's a loaded term. You have a lot more to what you have written than quote unquote the occult, or what people would think would either be straight paganism or pure ceremonial thelema, OTO kind of stuff. You incorporate other things such as qigong. Obviously, then you have some Taoist tints here and there if you're going to utilize that. And I think it gives you a much more level-headed approach, and it makes you sound a lot more level-headed having those elements into it. So I really dig that. But your books have been pretty interesting. The one I think that sticks out in my mind the most is the pop magic one,
Hmm.
and I'll say why. It's not it's not a provocative idea now, I guess you can say, post chaos magic, right? To do something like that, but the way you did it, you took an idea like that and you still made it somewhat I don't want to say revolutionary, but you did do something with that idea that most people don't do with it. And I really dug that because mostly it's about, hey, let's make a sigil and whatever, jack off to it or whatever, and the sigil has something to do with some kind of pop culture thing and yada yada. You had like a whole system, and it was more devoted. It was a lot more. It made more sense. You know what I mean? And I really dug that. So how did you get there? What was
Well, I first started practicing pop culture magic in the late 1990s, and I wasn't. And the irony of that is that I hadn't even gotten into chaos magic at that point. I was still doing like ceremonial style magic, like Golden Dawn rituals and stuff like that. But I began wondering if it was possible to apply pop culture to magic. And so I came to it independently of chaos magic. And then when I got into chaos magic later on, I found, oh, some other people have done some stuff like this, but they didn't have the necessarily the same structure or approach that I had. And then in 2004, I wrote the first edition of Pop Culture Magic. And at the time, it was pretty revolutionary because nobody, and even to this day, nobody else has written just a book strictly on pop culture magic other than myself. I mean, you do see a lot more people out there practicing pop culture magic now and pop culture paganism. And I mean, the irony of it all is that back in the day, like in the late 1990s, early 2000s, I had a lot of people who were telling me, oh, you're reinventing the wheel and it's not real magic and all that other stuff. All the joke's on them now because, of course, there's all these people who do practice. And I just, what I did is I just kind of captured that idea and I started expressing it. And I applied certainly some chaos magic tenets to it, but I also applied the background of Hermeticism and neo-shamanism and ceremonial magic that I had already been practicing as well to it and developed it as a system. And since then I've continued, I've since, continued to refine it. So like in Pop Culture Magic 2.0 and Pop Culture Magic Systems, I really focused more on how to turn this into something that was more than just a one-off working. Because the first book was really, okay, you want to work with pop culture? Here, slap this together and do a pop culture magic working, and there you go. A little bit of a system in place, but it was more of a one-off working. But the later books, which I wrote about 10 years later, by that time I had done a lot more work with it and I'd gotten around to thinking, there's definitely got to be more to this than just doing one-off workings. And so I started to really look at it from the perspective of how do I create a coherent system that if somebody wants to work with a specific pop culture, they can actually create a viable system of magic where they're interacting with those pop culture spirits. And they're developing unique original workings that are specific to that, and it's something that they can use to meaningfully transform their life. Right. And I think that really that's just the direction pop culture magic in general is going in. I mean, I wouldn't even say that pop culture magic is chaos magic anymore, because at this point it's totally become its own thing. And that was, and I'll admit that was part of my intention, with developing it further, because it was like, well, chaos magic is great. It's got its own things, but there's so much more to pop culture magic than just that. And of course, the other thing that I think is important to emphasize is that at least in my approach to magical work in general, I like to take non-occult disciplines. So like I took pop culture studies, for example, and I applied that to the whole pop culture magic system, because I was thinking to myself, okay, here's what these academics are saying about pop culture. There's things that they're saying that are valuable that could really help someone develop a system of magic. That's not their intent, of course, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't apply that particular lens to our magical work and see how it can transform the way we approach it.
Right. Yeah. I think that's something that is very undeniably you, and as an essence, and a lot of what you do is, you remember in the 90s, in the occult boom of the 90s, I guess you can say, because there was like this real occult boom, right? There in the 80s, it was like this crazy satanic panic, crazy shit that was going on,
Right.
It was just deals with the devil. That was all the 80s was about. And but in the 90s, there was like a real boom of legitimate occultism that blew up, and a lot of it was neo-shamanism. I mean, a lot of it was very tinged with it. And it's interesting, like musically, somewhat aesthetically, and even in the occult sciences, I guess you could say, of the 90s, it was still tinged with this neo-shamanism. And I think that's what's gone through as a thread through your systems here, that still maintains that. And I think that's what really defines it differently. I don't think it's because it has that it makes it different. I think it's taken it to different directions because of that. And that I like, because that was the other thing. I mean, in the late 90s, at least, in that kind of stuff, chaos magic got really huge, and it was this postmodern response to society and It was kind of social, politico-social with it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I really dug the neo-shaman approach, not because it was apolitical or asocial, but because it was from a completely different take. You know what I mean? And it still wants to look at the human in its relation to the universe, whatever, the universe, the world, on and down the turtles, I guess you could say. But yeah, and I think that's what I love. I look in your wall. It's all through it. You can see it, and I love that because that keeps, in my opinion, keeps it grounded. You know what I mean? It keeps you emotionally grounded. It keeps you psychologically grounded, and that's probably why you're still around doing the things that you're doing. Than other people that have, you know, there's stories of that part of that world of people who just didn't end up well because they were just, they're off their line, I guess you could say.
Well, I've always taken a very grounded approach to magic, and one of the things that I emphasize in a lot of my work is actually bringing it more into the body as well, because a lot of Western occultism is very detached from the body. And so when you have that level of detachment, I think you're missing out on something essential to your practice. And so the way that I tend to approach my magical work in general is really grounding it in the physical. I'm not a huge fan of astral projection, for example. I mean, been there, done that, a long time ago, but I really don't use it that much these days, other than with mansion of memory technique. And which has a very specific purpose in and of itself. But I think that when we learn to embody the work that we do and we bring it into our everyday lives and make it a part of ourselves and we live it, that's when it becomes much more real. Whereas, if you have this thing where you're kind of like, well, it's all up here in my head and I have a specific time and space for it, but it's not, otherwise it's just kind of out there and I'm going on with my life. There's a real disconnect with that. And that disconnect ends up becoming a dysfunction that in and of itself can cause a person's magical and mundane lives to implode because there's not an effective holistic balance in what they're doing.
Yeah. And probably early internet communities too were, they were crazy.
I remember I was part of the Z list way back when. So yeah, okay. there was definitely some craziness.
That's from back in the day. I remember those. I guess like I still have fond memories though of the early internet and the occult. That was so cool because then you could get like grimoires for free and read them. That was the big thing for me, at least. I couldn't do that before. They cost like an arm and a leg. You had to go to a New Age bookstore and like order them, and people would be like, "Why do you want that?" And and
because I want to sell my soul to the devil and get power.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, and I remember like getting on sacredtext.com. I think they were around in the late 90s, something like that. It was something like that. And God, I remember all those grimoires you could get into and read.
The irony of that now is that we've come full circle, and now you have these small presses that are putting out these super expensive grimoires, with the leather bound books, and the goat skin paper and all that other stuff. And it's an aesthetic all its own that's just, utterly amazing. And it's like, wow, like I would not spend that much money on a book. I mean, I love books, don't get me wrong. But then again, I'm also just like more into I'm just a very practical oriented
I'm with
magician.
you about that. I've seen those advertised, and it's crazy. And sometimes it'll be like a book that I've never heard of before, and I'm like, what is it? And now I have to like find some kind of jacked copy of it or something on the internet just to figure out what it is, because it kills me, the curiosity, because it'll be called something like The Green Fairies Dance on the Red Dragon's Horn, second reprint. I'm like, what? There was a first one? I didn't know anything about this. What is this? So yeah, it's I got a hold of a scanned copy of one of those kinds of books one time, and I looked through it and I was like, oh man, this is like stuff you'll find anywhere. This isn't like really like crazy. It's got some commentary on it that's different, but that's it.
Basically, it's just really fancy marketing.
Yeah,
to get people to spend money, and people will spend money. I mean, there will be people that will unload a couple $100s to get a grimoire because hey, it looks fancy and everything else, and then it's just like, but you could have gotten that same information for like $20.
It's true,
or for free or whatever.
Yeah,
and I mean, I think that. I think, I take the opposite tack where I want to make magic as accessible as possible. So like for me, the books that I write, are very practical oriented. They're very, there's not a lot of esoteric terminology. It's really driven toward here's what you can do. Here's how you can do it. Feel free to challenge what I've shared. And same thing like with my classes. It's all driven toward making things as accessible as possible, because I don't feel like you need to charge an arm and a leg for people to learn about magic or use it to do whatever they want to do with their lives.
No, I think that's ruined a lot of those communities already. You've got, what's his face, the big guru, I guess you could say, was his EO Ketting or whatever, however you say his name, the one that does the summon power from wherever, from like, it's like a de jour menu every week of something different, summon power from the stars, summon power from the devil.
I think lately it's been slut sex magic or something like that. So I mean, yeah, you see these commercials go round and round, and I'm like, hey, do your thing, man. That's awesome. I mean, obviously it's working for him, so
right.
More power to him.
Well, it's the squeeze pageification of everything on the internet is really what's happened. Like there's going to be somebody who's going to take some kind of niche on the internet and go, oh, there hasn't been a squeeze page yet for that. Okay. Or like a funnel page or whatever. I'm going to do it. And then that's usually what happens. And I'm actually surprised that it took someone that long to do it with occult stuff, but they did. And it's just, I'm utterly fascinated by those kinds of things because it's like free market research.
Well, it's like the online, and it's the intersection of online marketing with occultism. And I mean, admittedly, I do some stuff like that myself. I've got my read magnets that are free. I send people down a bit of a funnel. They learn a little bit about me, and then they learn about my books and stuff like that. But I mean, that's pretty much
the guy, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's the extent of it. I'm not, and I mean, even when I do like a bit of advertising on Facebook, I'm not going out of my way and doing the whole glam thing about it. I mean, and again, I mean, sometimes that's what works for people. For me, I find that because I'm such a practical person in a lot of ways, and I'm just kind of like, what you see is what you get. So if you don't like it, that's okay. And if you do, then great, here it is, and do what you want to do. And there's really no need to do anything else other than that for me, because I found that, and the irony of that is, I did go through a little period of that at one time, like right before. It was in 2016, 2017, and it was right before the self-employed business I was in at the time crashed and burned, and I had to get a job at the thing. And part of the reason I had to get that job was because I was doing this thing that just did not work. It didn't fit me. I was trying to fit myself into this like marketing vibe that was kind of sleazy. And
right.
People were like, Taylor, I don't know, like, what are you doing, man? Like that's not you. And I was like, you know what? You're right. And so I just stopped and I quit the business I was in at the time, and I went to work at a call center. And it was a very humbling but a very good experience for me, because what it really did is it forced me to figure out, well, what do I really want to do? I know I don't want to take phone calls for the rest of my life, but I don't want to be a coach anymore. And I don't want to come off as this sleazy person. And it was like, all right, well, I really just want to write. And so I'm just going to write. And that's what I did, and started, writing, really started, took all the rights to my books back, and then, and then started, self-publishing everything and going down that route. And I found that to be much more satisfying. And I was much more focused on building community with people and really connecting with them and finding out, like, well, what's really important to you? What do you want to learn about? And taking that approach and just making it all about the community instead of like anything about myself has worked so much better. And it's just the right way to do things in my mind, because there's no ego in it. It's really truly about serving the community and the people that need you. And the people that don't need you, that's okay too.
And you know what the thing is like, that's business. That's what it's supposed to be. You know what I mean? It's supposed to be, what do you need? And let's see if I can do it. And if I can do it the way you like it, let's do business. Like, that's how it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be like, I mean, it can be this uber like slick marketing, all style, barely substance to it. You can do that, but yeah, it's never going to really create something sustaining, I don't think, because you're always going to be in this cycle of having to like consistently net new attention.
Well, you're always in a churn cycle is really what it is. And I think that's, and you're burning people out, and at a certain point, people are kind of like, well, this isn't getting me what I really want. And And I mean, speaking for myself, that's not something that I want. Having gone through that experience myself, where I took some online stuff, not from a magician, but a marketer, and really just like at a certain point, I was like, man, this guy just keeps putting stuff out, but none of the stuff that he's putting out really works all that well.
No,
And again,
amen.
I had, when I took some time away from it all, eventually I did figure out how to make it all work, but make it
Right.
work in a way that was ethical and was really about the people that and what they needed, and ultimately was really just kind of like, look, I'm just going to put this stuff out there. If you want it, great. If you don't, you don't. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just doing my thing, and it's, I'm here to help you guys out if you need help. And I like that approach much better. It's a lot less stressful. It's much more chill, and things just kind of seem to go along nicely.
Yeah. Well, I think you bake the marketing message into the product itself. You know what I mean? That you just bake it into it, and then if it does its work, like a pie or something, there's a lot of people I've known that have done really well in music, and some of the people I've known have even like made some really genre defining albums that have done super well and still do super well, and they've all were done in that spirit. They were not done in the spirit where they're like, hey, we got this little law. They set it up and they only thought about it from the angle of how to get here and how to get there. They just didn't do that. They baked what was good about it into the actual thing itself, and then they just dropped it out. And it's like, hey, I hope you guys like it. And then boom, it becomes something huge. I mean, way huge.
Right. And I mean, the thing of it is you really, I mean, you really have to do it from the right place.
Right.
It's really got to be like, okay, if I make money from it, great. But, and it's nice to make money. I'm not going to deny that, because, I like being
Right.
self-employed, but it's really like, okay, this is really like for whoever gets it and needs it. Great. That's why it's here. And if it served you and it's done its job, then the money will follow. And if it doesn't, then okay, then on to the next thing that and pay attention at the same time. What can I learn from this?
Right.
And I think a lot of people, not just magicians or occultists who are trying, or whatever, but I think a lot of people in general with a business make that kind of mistake, where what they're focused on is trying to, they're so focused on trying to make the money instead of putting the customer first. They're so focused on their own gratification instead of what can I do to take care of the person who's coming to me.
Right.
Whereas I think that when you reverse that and you're like, okay, I'm here and I'm here to take care of the people coming my way in the best way that I can, and I'm either going to refer them on to someone else or I'll be able to help them or whatever, then that's going to show through, and people are going to trust you, and they're going to want to build. And when really it comes down to the fact that, like, you're building these relationships with these people, whether they're your customers or not. I mean, there's plenty of people who have not necessarily bought a book from me or a video class or anything, who nonetheless have interacted with me. And I'm like, yeah, if I can help you out, I will. And, I do the best I can to help them out, because it's at the end of the day, it's really more about like, how am I going to show up?
Right.
Instead of what can I get from you? How can I show up and help you? And, if you want to patronize my work as a result, then thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I think because all those guys, those like internet marketing guys, have like a lifespan, before like eventually people start being like, hey, I didn't really get much out of it, and yada, yada, yada. I think a lot of the guys who came out in the 2014, 15s are starting to like go through that now, where like, what was that guy? I forgot it. The guy that wrote "Fu Money" or something like that. There's a few of them. I watched them. I watched them to study them. I've always been fascinated by that, on a different level, not because it gets me something. I have no care about what it gets me. I've always just been fascinated watching people hustle like that.
Well, I mean, case in point, the one guy that I was taking classes from, his name is Scott Oldford, doesn't practice magic, but he was constantly having to reinvent himself.
Right.
In order to keep getting people in. Like, he was having to go like from here to here to here to here. And it's like, it's not like his stuff didn't work. Some of it did actually work, but the way that it was presented and the way that there just wasn't the necessary level of follow through that would have really made it work,
Right.
because it was more about, well, how much money can I make from these people instead of how can I take care of these people, at least in my opinion. And
No,
that was my experience with it. And so, I eventually dropped out of that because I'm like, this is changing who I am in a way that's making me not like who I am, and it's making other people not like who I am. And that's not how I want to show up. And on top of it, I mean, I just don't. This isn't working. And then, like I said, I took some time away from it all, and then I came back, and I'm like, well, there are certain elements that work. I just have to do this differently. And I figured out my way of doing it. And it's kind of like I was telling my friend Bill Duvendak this morning, who I recommend you interviewing sometime if you get a chance. But
okay.
I was telling him this morning, I'm like, I basically had to fail in order to succeed. And I said, it's the way I play video games too. I play the first couple hours and make every mistake conceivable in the book, learning the game. And then after that, I'm like, okay, I'm going to start over. And then I start the game over and I'm like, now I'm crushing it. And everything just goes smoothly and according to plan because I figured out all the dynamics to get me where I need to go.
I completely agree. If I've learned anything ever, it's because of failures. It's never because of success. I mean, because you learn really easily that like quick success sometimes is a lot of planning, but sometimes it's just lightning, and that's just it. And you can't just go by it. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's a false teacher. It doesn't tell you anything. But failure, man, it tells you the truth every time. Like it really does.
Yeah.
That's
Well, like,
going to happen.
Well, like my approach to magic is like, look at the results, because in your magical work, you always get a result. It may not be the result you want. Like, let's say you do a magical working and nothing happens. Well, that's still a result. It just indicates that there's something wrong with what you were doing, and now you need to figure it out. Or let's say you do a result and you get part of what you wanted, but not quite in the way you wanted. Well, that's an indicator right there. And it's like you can troubleshoot your magic that way. And it's the same thing with life. Look at the results, look at what you're getting, and then troubleshoot it and figure it out. And if you really want something, you will figure it out, because you're going to look at your results and you're going to be like, okay, well, why isn't this getting me where I want? Well, let's look at what I did. Well, I did X, Y, and Z, but why the way I did it really alienated these people, or it did this, or it did that.
Right.
I guess I need to go in and change why. Okay. Go in and change why. And sometimes, it involves taking a step back and taking some time. Like I spent, the first half year that I was at that customer support job, just kind of reading books and thinking about things and processing stuff and figuring out, well, like, what's my next step? And I was like, all right, my next step is I'm going to take back I'm going to learn about indie publishing, and I'm going to take back the rights of my books after I've tested one or two books and seen that I've written and see if they work. And I did that, and then I'm like, okay, this works. So now I'm going to take back the rights, and now I'm going to put this together. And then I created this process of, basically pumping out a book a month. And good quality books. It's not like I'm just going and, this is stuff that's been worked on and developed over the years. It's just that now's the time for it to come out. But it's because I took that time. And I think that that's really important for anyone. Like, if you fail, be willing to take a step back, really look through it, give yourself some time, especially if it's a big failure. And then pick yourself back up and figure out what you're going to do and move forward, because life will otherwise pass you by.
Right. No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more when it comes to anything like that, specifically about results being the ultimate decider of things, and trying to read the results like you would do via divination, right? Which makes complete sense from an occult point of view, from occult logic, I guess you could say. That would make complete sense that you should look at that anyways, the way it is. It's like looking at your candle after you burn it, just to see if it's got anything, it's got a face with teeth in it. You know what I mean? Just something like that, just to make sure, what you did was good. And but yeah, I completely agree. I remember I was really influenced in the 90s with Dr. Christopher Hyatt and the Falcon and New Falcon publishing, thing.
Oh yeah, I remember reading some of that stuff too.
Yeah,
still have the books.
I had a dream at one time of like having a publishing house like that, but I did other things after that. I was like, no, thank you. But
it's a lot of work, believe me. I've been on that. I've been down that road. It is a lot of work.
Yeah, and there's a lot of like squabbles and fights, and you know what I mean. It's a lot of things like that, and yeah. But I loved some of those books, not all of them, but I loved some of them. I loved Undoing Yourself and things like that, and Dogma Days, all that, the psychedelia turned awry kind of stuff,
Yeah.
and it reminds me of that a lot of results matter. How things turn out, just because it doesn't turn out the first time one way, then you have to go back and look at yourself and be like, what happened? What did I do that wasn't enough? What did I do wrong? Did I skip a step? Did I cut a corner? Of course, like Hyatt would take that to like this extreme level and be like, you've got to read the Grand Grimoire and do everything that it freaking says to do to the T. You need to have bat's blood, cut that bat's head off.
Yeah, I mean, that's where you kind of have to be like, okay, is that really how far I want to go? I mean, that's kind of like I've always looked at any magical working where they're prescriptive like that, and they're like, you have to do it this way, and I'm like, well, do you really? What's really going on there? Like, what's the underlying system or formula or whatever, and can you replicate that without having to do some of the things they're saying? And I found that you generally can't, because if you understand what the principles of magic are, then you can take those principles out of anything and apply them to something else and still be able to get results. I mean, that's what I did with pop culture magic. It's what I've done with all of my other systems, and it's basically the way that I teach magic. Is like, all right, here's your process. Figure out what you want, figure out the steps that you're going to take to get it, put it all together, and if you understand the principles of magic, you should be able to take anything. Like, you should be able to, for example, take this little magnet thing with balls out of it and turn it into the focus of a magical working, which I did, wealth magic working. You should be able to do that and get results.
Right.
And if you know what you're doing. Now, if you don't know what you're doing, that's where you review you review that knowledge and get that and do some work and practice, and then go from there.
Yeah, I think, I have to give a kind of a qualifier before I say this. I think one of the most underrated books, I guess you could say, of the classical tradition of all the grimoires and yada yada yadas and everything, I think one of the most underrated, and like I said, I have to give a qualifier when I finish this because it won't make sense when I first say it, was The Sacred Magic of Abramelin and the Mage. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's underrated in the sense of how many times it's been done or quoted or anything else like that, but the text part was like the most underrated part, like when he talks, because there's one thing he says in there that's so true, when he said that you have to treat these things as if you were an artist in painting, and that your first painting is going to suck and the second one's going to be slightly better, and then until one day you're a master, and it's only because you've done these things so many times over and over again. And I remember reading that being like, why does no one ever quote that? That is like there's, if you look at any of those old ones like that, there's barely a guy who ever sits you down and says, hey, let me explain something to you. Let me explain how something works. It's always like, power on the devil in graveyards and da-da-da-da, and here's a warning. But like, it was one moment where he actually sat down and was like, let me explain to you a little bit of some insight about how this works. You've got to do it a bunch of times in a row.
That reminds me of Mastery by Robert Greene, which is a great book. I'm actually rereading it right now, and that's a good example of that. And I think in response to that, I think the reason why you don't see that thing commonly emphasized is that really, people get really caught up in the image of occultism. Like, oh, I want the power, the thing, and not necessarily the work. I mean, one of the things that I've had people say to me is, well, I like how just honest you are about the fact like this takes work, and that you've got to, that you've got to do this over the long haul, and that, you're talking about your daily work and all this other stuff, and how sometimes, things don't necessarily manifest right away, or that you don't have like you do a meditation and nothing, essentially magic seems to happen at the time. And it's like, well, that's true. Right. That's the way it is. And I wish more people were honest about it. But you rarely see occultists talk about their failures. I mean, really, I can't think of too many people that I know of, other than myself, that say, well, I did this and this is where I fucked it up. Or I did this and this is where it went wrong. Whereas, like, I mean, in my case, sure, I'll share some of my successes, but I'll just as equally share the things that don't work, because I want people to learn from my mistakes. And I want people to see that, like, look, you are going to fail sometimes. Like, you're going to do magical work, or you're going to do something else and you're going to fail at life sometimes. And you're just going to have to pick yourself up and figure out your next step and keep going, instead of being like, well, I've always got my act together. And I swear, it's like, I look at most of the people out there that write and talk about magic, and it's like, it's like nothing ever went wrong for them. I'm like, there's no way that's the case.
Right.
That they've messed up at some point or another. They're messing up right now, because like we mess up every day to one degree or another. We make mistakes, to some degree or another. And the name of the game isn't to be perfect. The name of the game is just do the best with what you've got and keep learning.
Yeah, well, I think I think there's a lot of elements of truth telling to the way you do it, because that is true. I mean, I'm a professional musician, and there's some days when I practice I just suck. That's just the way it is. There's nothing I can do about it. I've got to walk away. I can't, if I try to force it, nothing's going to happen. I'm just got to walk away and come back, and I'll have it.
Yeah, well, same thing with me in writing. I mean, there are times where, like with writing, where it's like it's just not happening. Like, I spent the last 2 weeks that I was working at the job trying to work on the current book that I'm working on, and it wasn't happening. And I'm like, all right, I'm just giving up for the next 2 weeks. I'm gonna get done with this job, then I'll come back to that book. And lo and behold, like, that thing's practically written itself now. Like, it's almost done, and I'm like, all right, this is pretty sweet. But it's like I had to just recognize that I couldn't force it.
Yeah, it seems like when it comes to the occult and magic and things like that, there is this expectation of perfection, and this expectation of rigorous perfection every time. And it's a strange thing. It really is. I've never understood that. So what is the latest thing you've been writing right now?
Well, I'm just about wrapped up with Walking with the Spirits, which is my latest book. That's going to hopefully be coming out later this month in August. And it's really a book about my system of working with spirits and how I use experiential embodiment to connect and communicate with spirits. So, like the classic grimoire stuff, you have the whole thing of, I'm going to command the spirit to appear before me and talk to me in my language, and I'm going to call other spirits to force it to work for me. Well, that's not my approach. My approach is I'm going to connect with the spirit, and I'm going to communicate with it in the way that it prefers, which may not be necessarily in a spoken language, but might be through the senses or other things like that. And I'm going to build a relationship with it where I'm going to ask it what I want and tell it what I'm willing to give. And if we come to a mutual agreement, then great. And if we don't, we part ways. And so that's basically what the book is about. And it's really kind of laying out the concept and practice of experiential embodiment, learning to, really bring your body into the work
Right.
that you're doing spiritually. And so again, I'd finished, I published last month, Walking with Magical Entities, which was kind of my take on working with magical entities and everything. And that's like the first book in the series, and this is the second. And then there will be a few more books in the series, although there's gonna be a little break in between that because I've got some other projects I'm getting ready. Like I'm in the process of getting ready to launch my Indie Author Success nonfiction series, which is all about teaching independent authors how to create and build a business around their writing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I understand a little bit of what you're talking about. When I started doing, when I started really seriously doing the Goetia way back in the day, of course I did everything the way you were supposed to do it at first, and then I did it the modified approach, which is like the LBRP and the da 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 da. And then like there just came a point in time, because I in the late 90s and early 2000s I had done Qigong, and I had done Xing Yi Chuan. I had learned Xing Yi Chuan Gong Fu, and that was like my life for that time. And I would do a lot of things like that to give myself this kind of physical awareness while I did it. And then I started just stopping making the circles and doing all of this and that, and I started working more from this side of it. And it was a lot. It was more efficient. It was more time efficient. I never had an issue. There was no hands that dragged me to hell.
It's organic. It's organic. And yeah, exactly. Yeah. I've never had any issues with spirits the way other people talk about. Like, I read these stories, like, someone will be like, well, yeah, I work with Boone and he ended up burning my house down, or I did this. It's like, wow, like, what are you people doing wrong here? Because I've never had those issues. Like, like the closest I would say that I've had an issue was that I was working with some goetic demons, during my sleazy marketing period, and they kind of amplified some of the stuff I was dealing with and going through, because they were like,
Right.
well, that's what you seem to be doing, so we're going to help you. And I was like, okay, like when I decided like enough was enough of that, I was like, all right, guys, I'm gonna stop working with you for a while. I'm gonna let our relation. Nothing else went wrong or anything like that. It was just kind of like, okay, time to part ways.
Right.
And so and that's really kind of what my this whole series of Walking with the Spirits is about. It's teaching people this alternate approach, because I see like so much of this grimoire stuff where it's like, well, you've got to call the spirit up in a magical circle and in a triangle, and you've got to call the angels over and say like, and compel and basically use them to coerce the spirit to work for you, and harm the spirit. And in the midst of it, there's this mixed message of, well, really, when the spirit works for you, it's for its own benefit. Well,
Right.
how is that for its own benefit? Like, really, I just don't get that. Like, you're going to enslave me for my own benefit, and I'm not necessarily getting any kinky sex out of it or anything else.
Right.
So it's not like it's, I mean, at least, I mean, if I'm going to get enslaved, at least give me the kinky sex to go along with it.
How much do you think post 90s modern occultism is in debt to Santeria, voodoo, macumba, candomblé, like all of these different traditions that have had, it's not like that they were the only people that thought this up, but they had this transactional approach towards spirits instead of this kind of like capturing approach. You know what I mean? Like almost this colonial approach where like you show up to their island and you just go like, hey, work for me. And then that's it. Like, and you don't even
work for me, or I'm going to genocide you.
Exactly. And you don't give them anything. Like you don't give them like, here's some rum. Like you don't even do that. You just go like, for free, do it. And I'm like, that sounds very awfully vaguely familiar to the past 500 years of history. I don't know, man. It just seems a little bit like that. And so like, it seems when the mysteries of voodoo and all of those various Afro-Caribbean religions came around, and it started to become more public about what they believed, and that world became more open. It seemed that all of a sudden there was much more of a grounded shamanic approach to occultism, and it took a minute to reach all the way to the extreme Western guys, but eventually it did. And in my opinion, I'll just say that the New Falcon Press of Urban Voodoo probably did a lot for people, even though it did nothing to actually explain real voodoo at all. But it humanized it to people who had no idea what that stuff was, except for that it kills people and that zombies and some kind of blowfish dust or whatever, and that's about it. And I think there was a lot after that kind of like made people think like, well, what if I did something for that guy? What if I paid him off or talked to him and said, hey, what would you like if you did this for me? What would you like from me? Can we have a relationship? Do we like each other? Just starting there first. And it seems like when they came in, that's when that started getting more solidified. At least this is how I see it.
Well, see, I've never actually like done anything with voodoo or anything along those lines, so I really can't speak to that, because that'd be me making an assumption about something I don't have any experience with. But what I can say is that at least in my own sense of things, I mean, the first couple books that I started reading were books by Ted Andrews, where he, like how to work with spirit guides and working with the nature spirits, and those books. He approached it very much from a place of like, look, you're coming to work with these spirits, you're going to want to work with them. So you're having an arrangement, you're developing a relationship with them. And so he was different from like that Western grimoire tradition, and that's what really influenced me. And so whether maybe he got that from them, or maybe, I know in his case, I think because he had at least something of an upraising in like Native American shamanism.
I mean, it does seem to be a more prototypical human approach to it, and it seems to be a more ancient approach, because that's how the Hermetics were like. They were like the same way. They're like, well, you got to get in there and just figure it out. And you got to see if you get along, and then you got to see what how this works. How does the transaction work? And you got to find this out. And then with that knowledge, you're now somebody because you have this,
Right, right. Well, and I mean, I think, and what I think is really interesting is like right now you see like right now, within the last decade or so, you see this kickback from the grimoire tradition, and that's
Right.
become suddenly really popular again, and people are really like, oh, I want to summon a demon up and compel it to do stuff and appear before me and all this other stuff, and I'm just like, yeah, that's really not going to work out for you. At least I don't think it will. And I mean, even if it does, great. But, I think you're going to get a lot further if you do it a different approach.
Right.
And so, I mean, I think it really just kind of boils down to, the golden rule, which is treat others as you would be, as, you want to be treated. Well, if I'm going to go and work with spirits, I'm going to, treat them the way that I would want to be treated. And so I'm going to, I'm going to be like, hey, look, I want to work with you. Here's what I can do. If you're willing to do X for me. Okay, yeah, sure. Or no, I don't want to. All right, that's fine. I'll, move on to someone else. And so, I mean, for my own approach to that, it was really influenced, as I said, by reading Ted Andrews stuff. And then later on reading demonolatry books. I don't know if you're familiar with Stephanie Connolly Reisner.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Yeah, she's an amazing magician and a good friend of mine. And I mean, I remember.
Really? Oh, that's cool. That's very cool.
Yeah, I remember first meeting her like in the 90s. I was on this demonolatry e-list, and they were talking about like, well, when you work with demons, you do it respectfully, da 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 da. And I'm like, that makes sense to me. And so like all along, I kind of inculcated that into my spiritual practice.
Right.
So I never really did any of like the grimoire stuff or anything like that because it never made sense to me. And like even when I took on some of those trappings where I'm like, okay, I'm going to do a magical circle and all that, it was never with the thing of like, I'm going to force you to appear. Instead, it was just like, well, this is what I have available to me, so this is how I'm going to work it. But really, I just want to work with you very, in a friendly manner. And as I said, since then, I've really focused in on the experiential embodiment, making it a part of my bodily practice, as it were, like working it through me. Because like you think about invocation and I'm invoking a spirit. Well, yeah, I'm calling out here to the spirit, but I'm also setting the space up in here within myself. And so I'm embodying that connection as much as I'm connecting with spirit externally. And it becomes its own identity, which is a mesh of myself and that spirit. Right. And so, when you work with stuff in that way, it fundamentally changes your approach because you're no longer trying to force things to happen. Instead, you're letting things happen. And I think the biggest problem I see with Western magic, and this isn't even just like working with spirits, it's just in general, is there's a lot of more emphasis on forcing things than there is on working with. And when you change your approach to being like, well, I'm going to work with this, and I may not be fully in control, but I can steer the current. I can steer along the line and get where I want to go. You get better results.
I completely agree. I never understood the paradigm of people who they weren't Christians, right? So they didn't believe in Jesus, and half the time they didn't really even believe in a Judaic God, but they'll crack open a grimoire and like use all of these names. And I mean, I get it. I some people are like, well, you just got to do it because it says that. I don't believe it, but I use it because it's, blah, 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 blah. But I mean, like that approach of like capturing something and then threatening it in the name of Jesus, to like, and I'm like, but you're not even a Christian. I don't even understand this. So like, how do you think this works? Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's like either, go ahead.
I think that's a good example of where people have not applied critical thinking to their magical practice. I mean, really,
it's really true.
It's like, look, like you're, it's the whole craze of, well, you don't need to know how magic works. You just do it. Just pick up a book and just do it. Well, first of all, there's something inherently hypocritical in somebody saying that, especially if they have written a book. Because if you're writing a book on magic, you are telling people how it works. Right. There's no, so you don't tell people, well, just do it. You have to be able to explain. But a lot of times what I find is that people won't critically examine what they're doing. And for myself, like with how I approach magic and how I teach it and everything else, it's all about, I'm going to teach you how this works and I'm going to teach you to think for yourself. And if you challenge me, that's great, because that means that you're figuring out for yourself what works. And it may not be the way I do things, and that's okay. Like I'm not invested in people doing things the way that I do things. I'm invested in them figuring out for themselves how it works. And I'm just along for the ride to help them out a little bit and point the way. Like, hey, you could go in this direction or that direction or there. And part of that really comes down to the fact that I self-taught myself. Like, I didn't have a teacher. I read books, and I practiced those books, and I worked those books, and then I started asking myself, how can I do this easier and better? And and that's how I started experimenting. I mean, I really started experimenting with magic within the first year of practicing it, and I don't always see that with a lot of people. They'll just be kind of like, well, my teacher says so, or this book says this, but they don't necessarily have that driving passion to find out, like, well, why does it do this? Whereas for me, I've always been insatiably curious, and I want to know, like, well, why does this work? What can I do to make it better? How can I get better results?
Yeah, I'm completely with you about that. That's entirely what I did. I started as a teenager and as a late teenager in Bulls Gap, Tennessee, which is like in the middle of nowhere, like way in the middle of nowhere. And I lived in this 200-year-old cabin. It cost $160 a month in rent back then.
Oh, wow.
It had a wood stove in it. So that was the heat. It had electric in it, but it had a wood stove for heat. And it was a crazy life that I lived then, chopping wood, and like it was really cool. And at that time, I took advantage of like reading Abramelin the Mage and trying out this initiatory process, because I was a virgin at that time. I didn't have anybody. I didn't know anyone. So like I was out in the middle of nowhere.
Perfect time to do it, right?
Exactly. There was like never a better time to do anything like this. So I did that. And I remember dying of like anticipation the entire time. And I remember being like, after I came out of that, I was like, I'm never going to do that again. Like, I'm just going to go straight into shit. Like, I'm not going to do this. There was no revelatory experience. There was no, like, I mean, don't get me wrong, being alone and silence, of course, like there's things that happen, there's insights you get, but there was no like, and anything like that happened.
The heavens didn't part, there was no golden chalice,
Exactly.
and a whole bunch of monks, singing or anything. I'm going Monty Python on you here, but still.
And I didn't walk away with like more knowledge than I had before, except for cursory stuff that you would get just by being quiet and meditative, Well,
see, that was it. That the experience was the thing. It's just that the experience didn't live up to the hype.
Exactly. I really wish people would just be honest about it, though. And just be like, look, you just need to be quiet for a while, and just that's all. I can't tell you anything else, because after that, you'll figure it out. You just gotta be calm for a minute.
Well, and I think part of that really comes right down to the fact that again, people are so invested in the appearance of it that it's like, okay, well, no. Sometimes the reality is just you do your work today and nothing happens. Like
right.
you call the archangels, you do all the chants and everything else, and nothing seems to happen. And what you don't realize is that actually something is happening, but it's happening in the deep background. And those moments will come, like when you will suddenly come, and you'll be like, oh man, why did it take so long? Well, it took so long because everything was getting laid out for you, but because you were so caught up in wanting it to occur in a way, it kind of pushed it away even further. And I think that that's kind of a good lesson for anyone to learn about
Absolutely.
magic. Like, it's not, people want Hollywood magic. I think that's really the best way to put it. They want
the craft.
Yeah, they want the craft. They want Hollywood magic, and that's not how magic works. And anyone who is really genuinely practicing it is not doing anyone else a favor if they're not being honest like that. It's just be honest. Just, this is what it is. This is what happens. And yeah, sometimes I have some pretty amazing, miraculous moments, but far often than not necessarily. Sometimes I'm just doing the work. I'm just chopping the wood and carrying the water until, it is what it is.
Exactly. No, I wish it was more like that too. It seems like there's a lot of people in that community that are into it for the intimidation, and it's really odd. It's like this kind of yeah, this aura of it, and it's like, yeah, I mean, it is
Well,
what it is.
and that's an attachment to a sense of power, a sense of ego, and things like that. And again, you kind of have to let that go, I think,
Sure, yeah,
because it's not really why it's I mean, sure, you can do that, and I mean there are a lot of people who do it, and hey, great, they get their power games. But I think like if you really get into the work at a certain point, those trappings fall away, and you're just like, okay, I'm just doing the work.
right. I could, yeah, I concur. I concur absolutely about that. So when you deal with spirits,
Hmm.
and we can use that as a broad term, so you can go anywhere you want in that term. What what do you think? And I'm not asking for you to, like, definitively tell me anything, but I really want to know what your opinion is of what that is. Is it real to you? Is it an entity in fact, or is it some kind of like symphony of both you and it? Or I'll let you go ahead.
Well, I mean, when I'm working with a spirit, I'm dealing with a real entity, an objective entity that has its own existence. It may not be an existence I fully understand.
Right.
You know, I think that a lot of times, again, people have this Hollywood magic notion of things where they want the spirit to appear, in a certain way. They want it to show up and speak English or whatever language or whatever, and all that stuff. And that's very Hollywood. But like for me, it's like, well, I know the spirits are real because I've felt their presence and I've worked with them. They've never necessarily appeared to me in a flash.
Right.
I've certainly had a transmission of information, and I've applied that information, or I've done whatever else. Like I do a daily work called the Sphere of Art. It was written about by R.J. Stewart, and I do it every day. I've made some modifications of it, but I work with the four elemental archangels and then a few others. And for me, it's not like the archangels suddenly appear and they're like, "Oh, hey, Taylor, buddy, what's up? High
Right.
five." No. I mean, some days they show up, some days their presence is distance. I mean, I always feel them,
Right.
but sometimes they're going to be like, "Well, we don't really have anything to share with you. Just keep doing the work." And other times they're going to be like, "Oh, hey, I got this to lay down on you." I mean, some of the recent books I've written are a good example of that. Like Magic by Design was basically given to me by the Archangel Camiel, and he was like, "You need to write this." Okay.
Nice. Okay.
So, that was information transmitted, and I ended up writing that book. But that's the thing. Like it wasn't a case where he just sat down beside me and said, "Okay, Taylor, I want you to take careful notes while I tell you everything." No, it was just this download of information, and then I proceeded to write about it and put it out there. And it's why in the book I dedicated it to him, because I was like, well, this is really as much about the archangel and what he gave me as anything else. So I think people want spirits to be real in a certain way, and they are real, but they're real in a way that's not necessarily overt. I mean, the way I look at it is spirits are around us. They're always there, but how we connect with them and what we expect of them is not necessarily what they what's on their agenda. And us, we try to apply our humanocentric perspectives on
Right.
them. We're like, I want you to fit into my human term and appear before me in a way that's comfortable for me. I want the relationship to be all on my terms. And it's like that's not the way it works. The spirits don't care about what you want per se. They may be interested in it, but they're also, their concern is, well, what's my function? And are you getting in the way of my function, or can you help me with my function?
Right. Yeah. I've forever remained in a Schrodinger's cat level of belief. That's, and I like that place. I like it a lot, because the only reason why I would hold out any kind of ideas that things like that are real are directly because of experiences that I've had, or things like that. But at the same time, yeah, it is a strange thing. I'm always curious about everyone's answer about it. And I like your answer because it seems more realistic to me. That seems more like someone that's actually like sat down and has done shit. You know what I mean? Because seriously, it is a truth. You know how many times when I would start doing like Goetia and things like that, I mean, you do it and then sometimes you don't feel good about it. You feel extra focused, and then you do it and nothing happens, and that's it. That's just it. There's nothing. You can sit here if you want, but there's nothing going on. Like, and that's just the way it is. And then you do it again, and then there's something that turns on, and then you do it again, and something that doesn't turn on, and it's uber frustrating. Like, it really, really is, until you figure out like a flow of things. And of course, like, that's why those ideas of familiars and or guides or things like that are so important. I think, because I think things are sketchy like that until you find whatever is going to be that thing for you that guides you through it. Then it's something that you learn how to turn
Well, that's
on and
just it.
off.
You have to do the work. You can't just
Right.
not. You know the experience is earned. It's not given.
Right.
You either go and you do the work, or you don't. And if you don't do the work, then don't expect anything. And if you do the work, then know that as you continue to do it, some things will happen, but don't always expect it either. I mean, it's not always the case. And it's not like, the spirits are like anxiously waiting beside the telephone for our next text or phone call. Oh, Taylor's called today. Better show up. No, it's just like, they may not. And
Right.
that's okay. If you're really sincere about the work and you're doing it for the right reasons, then it's going to happen for you eventually. And it'll happen in a way that's truly transformative and is what you need right when you need it. And I mean, I say this as somebody who's done this work, and I've had many transformations in my life, and it's come about because I've done the work and I've trusted the work and I've just let it speak through me. And that's where I think, for a lot of occultists, they want to control it instead of letting it speak through them. But when you learn to let go and be in the experience and let the experience transform your identity, then you discover the real magic.
Spoken like a true neo shaman. And that's I love that. That's where my heart lies with this kind of stuff. It's where my heart
I don't know
lies.
if I'd call myself a neo shaman, but that's cool. I mean, I just kind of say, like,
Well,
I'm a magical experimenter / that's really what I call myself.
I think that term is dead now anyways.
Yeah.
I think it's something that I think was last used by Grant Morrison maybe in a comic book, and that's about it. So, but yeah, I mean, but that is where my heart lies with that kind of stuff. It's where, whatever you want to call it, that extension of yourself or whatever, that is what it is when you let it go. That's where it gravitates, is towards those assumptions and those thoughts and things like that. So no, I completely I couldn't agree more with absolutely everything you said. I believe in that. Do you let's talk about a little bit about something really kind of fun to talk about, really minor. Do you offer any kind of entities or spirits any kind of food or drink or anything like that?
I don't, but that's because I found that when I work with the spirits, like, I've asked them, what do you want? And what they want is they want my talent. So like writing and stuff like that. So, like if I write an article about them, that's the offering, or if I do a painting. But, for other people, they might. I think, it really comes right down to, you ask them what they want from you. And sometimes it might be an offering of your talent, and other times it might be an offering of food or wine or whatever else. And you just have to kind of figure that out. The best gift that can be given is something that comes from you, from the right place. And in my case, at least, it's always been my writing or the art that they've been interested in.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, it's one of the kind of like one of the understood things about like chicken sacrifices and voodoo and things like that. Mm-hmm. Because the whole point is that, like, at one time in West Africa, this was like valuable. You're giving something that was really, really valuable to a Loa or an Orisha, and you're like, that's it. Like this chicken and the blood of this chicken, like, this is important shit. And this feeds people. This is like real life. And that was the whole point of it. Like the ache, the essence of it is you give it. And so, yeah, I completely understand what you're saying. And I think that's a very, and that's what fascinates me about the occult and cultures inside of the occult, because it's like spirits deal with people differently from their culture. You know what I mean? Sometimes. And it's just fascinating to me. It's always fascinating. And some people who can break those trends, they tend to be like, I guess some traditions would call them a sorcerer or something like that. But it's just so fascinating to me like that. You talk to a Westerner, and it's like a spirit would want a cerebral thing. You know what I mean? It's very fascinating to me. And I agree. I've seen that before when I've worked in like the greater keys of Solomon and dealt with angelic beings, I guess you could say. Way different experience than dealing with said goetic beings. And it's so different. And the way things were the way they were affected were different. And again, it was cerebral. I didn't feel like any of the goetic beings were really Western. You know what I mean? I didn't feel like that. Like if you really deal with them, it didn't feel like that to me, but the greater keys did. They felt like very Western, you know, and like the angelic beings were so like paternal, not paternal. Yeah. Paternal. Like they were very like instructive, and they forced you to do shit. Like it wasn't like a, okay, here you go. This is what you need. They would be like, no,
they kind of want you to do this. Like, this is for your own good. Get to work.
They're really preachy and like instructive like that. And I love that. That's why I ask people like what they think about the existence of things. You know what I mean? Because I do notice that while I don't think anybody probably has an answer that is all encompassing about anything like that, there are similarities with people who have dealt with those said things. There are similarities, and that's what I think is so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, there's a tangent, but so your book is coming later this month, is what you're saying?
That's the goal. I mean, we'll see. You know, I'm wrapping up the first draft, so I mean, it might be the beginning of next month as well, but it's going to be coming out pretty soon. I'll have it up for pre-order probably by the end of this week. And then, you know, and I'll have a date picked. It's more along the lines of I got to get together with my editor and say, hey, like, you know, what's a good deadline for you?
Beautiful.
And so, you know, getting the book wrapped up itself is going to be, you know, once we're done here, that'll be the next thing I do. And so, you know, it's kind of the work of the day. Yeah, that's basically the goal. Get it wrapped up and then get it out to people.
Nice. And then, where are your books found? Like where are the outlets you can go?
Well, I mean, you can go to magicalexperiments.com, of course, which is my website. And then if you go on to amazon.com, you can get them on there. I'm going Amazon exclusive with them for now, just to test some stuff. You always have to test things as an indie author. So I'm going to try that out for a bit and see how things go with it.
Nice.
So that would basically be where I would say you could find them. And then, and that's the same for the fiction as well. The fiction, if you go to imagineyourreality.com, you can check that out there too. Awesome. Fiction actually has nothing overtly occult about it. Like I'm writing about like the zombie apocalypse call center, and it's all about call center agents fighting zombies. So, you know, it's not even like there's no magic or anything else. I thought it would just be fun to do fiction that had nothing overt about magic, but is very humorous and funny.
I'm working on a tabletop role-playing game that is completely about mundane life.
There you go.
It's completely about like working a retail job, and like isn't
that like Sims?
Right? I mean, and I've been working on it because I'm going to release it with an album sometime, and it's going to be just like a retail, and that's it. And you got to roll initiative on everything, and just see what happens. You can get like a Karen boss eventually. They'll come in and do stuff, and you'll have
Karen
to
boss. Yeah.
But yeah. Well, anyways, it's been an amazing conversation with you. Like I said, I really enjoyed talking to you. I really understand you, and I can understand everything you're saying. It's completely makes sense to me. I hope anyone who's listening, you go directly to this guy's stuff. He's got fiction and nonfiction, so I mean, what's your excuse for real?
Well, there you go.
Anyways, I want you all to just come on back. We're going to have a million better guests from the first one. The first one was a disaster. The first season was a complete disaster. It wasn't bad guests. It was horrible technology. I was starting off with this other one and this other software, and then I finally used Zoom. And then like with Zoom, like every time I was putting it out, like my voice sounded like this every time, and I have no clue why. And so I'm hoping
You're
all
Darth
this is gonna-
Vadering it.
it's true. Like people would talk normal, and then all of a sudden be like, "Hello, this is Up at Night with John," and I had no understanding why this is doing this, and it did it every time. So I'm gonna hope that there's no train wrecks this season. And
Well, hopefully I've helped you pop the second season cherry.
I
You know,
think
and
so. I think you have. It's been a really pleasant conversation. It's been amazing, actually. All right, I will hopefully have you back on here again in the near future.
please do. Yeah.
All right.